I think it's really important, especially, if you're listening to this and you're not a member of my generation, to take a step back and know that you don't know everything about it. Sorry, but I think there's a lot to learn. And just because you wouldn't have done it the same way doesn't mean that it was wrong.
Right.
And it doesn't mean that it's anyone else's fault.
Stand up.
Well, that, my friends, is young Lucy Solomon, who is 19 years old. She is a freshman at American University in Washington, D.C. She's the daughter of two good friends of mine, Jenny and Michael Solomon, and that's how I was introduced to her. I've known them for quite some time, but I never met Lucy. But today, she is the first guest in the inaugural episode of something I am calling SUPD Generation Z. Stand Up with Pete Dominic will feature young folks ages 11 to 26. Seriously, if there's like an 11 or 12-year-old that might want to say some things about an experience or something, I'm not going to interview them for an hour, but maybe I'll ask them a few questions. We could have fun. So send me your child. But mostly I've been given, of course, recommendations looking to talk to people between, say, 19 and 26. So if you know somebody that's smart, passionate, articulate, funny, has lived through something really challenging, send them my way. standupwithpete@gmail.com. But I am so excited to introduce you to Lucy today. She is a really, really interesting, highly intelligent, passionate, thought-provoking, articulate, opinionated young lady who's, I think she would consider herself as privileged specifically because of who she was born to. Her parents are two great people. Her dad is I met him when he was doing music promotion and management, and her mom, who I knew long before her dad, I met at the gym when I was like in my early 20s. That's how we became friends, and she is a social worker and an amazing woman, Jenny. And Lucy is promoting a fundraiser in Memphis, Tennessee, which you can learn more about in the show notes, but it is going to help people who are displaced because of climate change. Climate refugees, as they're called. Her and her friend and others are working with an organization they founded to help the International Refugee Assistance Project Climate Displacement Program, and hope to lend momentum to their efforts to create a legal framework for climate displaced families around the world. It's a daunting challenge, but a really important issue that she brings awareness to in this first segment of our conversation. And if you're not impressed yet, Lucy has just co-authored a column in Newsweek.com where the title is Climate Migrants Need Legal Rights. She writes, over the past year, we've all seen the devastating images across America and around the world of people who have lost their homes, their livelihoods to wildfires, hurricanes, or monsoon floods. While many of them can rebuild, others aren't and are forced to pick up and leave. They are the faces and stories of climate migration. An estimated 1.2 billion people will be displaced by climate-related events by 2050. That means that in less than 30 years, more than 1 out of every 8 people will have lost their homes. And then she goes on to talk more about the issue and what we can do about it, but you can read that at Newsweek. It's linked in the show notes. And I should add that she co-wrote that piece with Sophie Joseph, who is leading the Joseph Family Foundation and the fundraiser that they're hosting in Memphis on January 27th. Again, all the links to that will be in the show notes. But I think probably the most impactful and in many ways most inspiring part of our conversation is the last, say, third of it, which I really hope that you will listen to all of this interview, but especially the last part, because in the last part, Lucy shares very honestly and openly about how her sexual assault that she suffered last year at college. And it's just so important to hear. It's hard to hear, but the way that she talks about it really is empowering. And I think that parents are going to want to hear this, whether you have a son or a daughter who is, an adolescent, a Gen Z. I think you're going to really want to hear this whole conversation, but especially that last part. And the only other thing I want to mention is that I take these interviews very seriously because these are young people who are now they're really putting themselves out there on a platform like this on this show. And so I didn't know Lucy. Her mom told me about her, and I had this idea for SUPD Gen Z. And so I got to know her over the phone. We had 4 pretty lengthy phone calls, conversations. And of course, we really hit it off. I love talking to her. I love to learn about her life and her opinions, her thoughts, her experiences. And so by the time we put this down on tape, we'd already talked 4 times on the phone. And she had told me that she wanted to specifically talk about dating and the hookup culture and sexual assault in this day and age. And so I'm really proud of this. I took good care of it, and I hope of her in this conversation. I'm very excited for you to hear it. It's important, it's thoughtful, and I want to do a lot more of it. And selfishly, I guess to some extent, I've always wanted to be able to understand my daughters at every age they are at. And now that they are 15 and almost 18, I think a conversation with someone like Lucy, getting to know my intern Odessa, and other people that age, men and women, and people who identify as anything else, being that age, it's really helpful to those of us who are older. And it helps us for those of us who are parents and working with young people to understand how they see the world, how they navigate it. And so in many ways, I feel like this is a resource and utility for parents, teachers, as well as people who are hiring and working with young folks at their job, their firm, their mission, whatever it is. And finally, lastly, I just thought this was so cool. When she was 5 years old, Lucy sat on Bruce Springsteen's lap, and he sang to her. It was her birthday, and like I told you, her dad's a music manager, used to work on Bruce's tours and management team, and so he brings his daughter, then 5-year-old Lucy. She meets Springsteen, and guess what? I've got the video for you, the audio. I'll include the video for subscribers in the show notes and a photo of it. Ladies and gentlemen, the guitar you're hearing is being played by the boss, Bruce Springsteen, while little Lucy is on his lap helping him strum. You'll hear Jenny, Lucy's mom. You'll hear Bruce sing. Listen to this from about 2008.
We gave Lucy a guitar this morning for her birthday.
Lucy, you're playing. Listen to this girl go.
Definitely got the beat, though.
She got the groove.
Yes.
She's got the poise.
Today's my birthday. It's not your birthday. It's my birthday. Don't say it's your birthday, because it's my birthday. Go
Little
get
magic girl.
Go get your own birthday.
Yay!
Imagine having that story. All right. Well, there you go. Lucy is on Instagram if you want to contact her there at it's Lucy with 2 Y's, Lucy 2 Y's _hope. And I'll include her email address in the show notes. She said I could do that if anybody wants to reach out and contact her, if you're inspired by it, if you want to work with her, hire her, donate to her organization, learn more, you can contact her there. Ladies and gentlemen, the first ever episode of SUPD Gen Z, current and future very important influential person, the great Lucy Solomon.
Lucy, welcome to Stand Up with Pete Dominic. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
I have so many questions for you, and I've been looking forward to taping ever since we talked, and I was so impressed with all of what you're doing and all of what you have done. But I guess nothing really tops the fact that you were sang to, what is it, by Bruce Springsteen when you were little, and I just found that out, and I can't believe it. Tell me what happened.
Yeah, some would say serenaded. So I was probably 5 or 6 years old, and my dad was fortunate enough to work with Bruce Springsteen at one point in his life, and we have just a connection. So we were backstage at a Bruce Springsteen show, and I was obviously way too young to understand the magnitude of that. And it was actually my birthday. And we, I guess, got to see Bruce backstage, and somehow it came up that it was my birthday, and he plopped me on his lap, and he threw his guitar on, and he sang me this birthday song. It wasn't like the regular happy birthday to you. It wasn't that one. It was a different one. And I think it was pretty ad-libbed. And my mom is just the biggest fan. She was the fan who slept on the sidewalk for a Bruce Springsteen ticket.
Oh, wow.
He was just standing there, I think, shaking. And I think someone else had to grab the phone or grab the camera to record it, because she wasn't even, paying attention.
Imagine if there wasn't a recording or a photo and you
it would be horrible. I mean, I actually just recovered this recently. Like I forgot that it existed, and finding it, I feel so bad. I was so young that I reached down and I was like trying to strum his guitar while he was playing to me, because I was on his lap, and I was just fiddling with the guitar. And they said I was a natural, but I definitely am not. So
that is such a great story. That reminds me of the time my parents introduced me to Ronald Reagan and he hit me with my own fists. But this isn't about me. Hey, do you think, by the way, I want, a lot of the questions I'll be asking folks, young people are kind of, stem from sometimes from conversations I've had with my daughters who, of course, are almost 18 and 15. Do you think because just cameras were basically everywhere for almost most of your life, really easy to access, that somehow the fact that things were documented on video, does that affect your memory? Because most of us, the other human generations before yours, we didn't have cameras everywhere. Do you think there's anything to that without any data or research like that happened? You kind of remember it, or is it the video that you were remembering because you're just seeing the video of your life? Do you know what I'm asking? Do you get that?
Yes, 100%. And I think what the last sentence you said is really exactly how I feel. Is I don't know how much of it is my memory and how much of it is the video that I've seen and kind created this narrative for myself. So I can remember maybe bits and pieces of it. I don't remember sitting on his lap, but I sort of remember the room a little bit, but barely. I feel like so much of it is just I feel like my memory is kind of shot because I don't have to remember things the way that, you do before cameras existed. So I'm not really sure. Yeah,
memory is not the utility that it once was. It's not your fault, I guess. I mean, how many phone numbers do you know by heart?
I'm better than most. I know my parents, my grandmother, my brother, and my home phone.
Oh, well, that is impressive.
It's pretty. Oh, and my best friend. But I also have I would say I have a decent memory when it comes to numbers and things that are on a piece of paper or a screen. I can kind of see things in my mind and remember.
One of those.
It's photographic, but
right.
I can't remember memories as much.
Right.
It's really just when I'm studying for a test, I can see the words on the paper, which is kind of nice and helpful.
Which year are you at American University?
I'm a sophomore, so I just finished up my first semester.
How are you doing? Are you happy that you chose to go to school there and in that area? It's right outside D.C.?
Yeah, it's technically in D.C., but it definitely feels like it's not D.C. proper. It's the northwest section, and it's a couple metro stops to downtown and to the Capitol. So it's a pretty excellent location, and it's nice that we have a campus that we get to enjoy and that is a functioning campus, whereas there are some other DC schools where you're really just in the city and you don't have a campus. So that was definitely part of why I chose it, and I do really like being there. There's obviously downsides and upsides to every school choice, and while it was not my first choice, I am definitely happy I ended up there. I'm an international relations major, and it's really one of the best places to be. So I feel very lucky that I get to go to school there.
What made you care about the things that you care about, be interested in the things that you are interested in? And we're going to talk about this organization that you're working with and the charity and the issue that it's working to help people who are displaced because of climate change. It's a pretty specific issue within the climate crisis. Why do you care about this stuff? Your parents did something is one part of it, I know.
Yes, the hinting. Yes. So I think I've been fortunate enough to be really involved in nonprofit and social justice work since I was very young, because my parents have been doing that for the majority of their lives. And it's just become part of the culture in my family. And I'm very grateful for that. And I feel like it's just become a really integral part of me. So the story that I think you're referencing is probably from when I was 9 or maybe 8 or 9. And we lived in New York City in a pretty small apartment. I mean, it's New York City, so that's to be expected. And my brother and I each had our own rooms, but they were definitely small, and we all shared a bathroom, and it was totally fine and great. And we found out that, and my parents specifically, because, I was a child, I didn't really pay attention. They found out that there was a family from my previous elementary school, which was a public school. Parents and their daughter were unhoused and they were living out of their car. And my parents decided to take them into our home until they could be placed in a shelter, until they could get back on their feet. And they actually took my room and I moved in with my brother in his room. And I don't know exactly how long they stayed with us. And my guess is it was about 4 weeks. So there were 7 of us living in a quite small apartment. And I don't remember that much about the logistics of it, but I just remember that it was happening. It wasn't something that we really discussed that much. They told us, they said, these people, something along the lines of, these people need help and we have the means to help them. So we're going to, and that's how it happened. And we still, I think my mom still gets a text from the mom every year around the holidays, thanking her again, even though it's been about 10 years.
And because your parents basically, you gave something up. You gave up your room. You actually gave up your space. You gave up privacy. You gave up a lot and to help that family. And that did something to you that was like indelible and more than anything else?
Yeah. I mean, I think that it's the thing that has stuck with me the most is that when we have the means and the ability to help people who need it, we should, and we do. And I think that's kind of stayed with me for my entire life and has really influenced heavily the things that I choose to do and the ways that I choose to spend my time. And I try really hard to be conscious of, the experiences that other people have and know that we can't all understand the same things the same ways and that we have implicit bias and we have things that we need to be aware of and conceived notions, and we have to kind of work through that. But we also, that doesn't mean, even if it's uncomfortable, and I know this kind of gets into a very different topic, but even if it's uncomfortable, we have to do it anyway. And I think it also ties into my experience with Judaism because my family is Jewish and we have grown up with this idea of tikkun olam, which means repairing the world. And that's a really big tenet of Judaism and something that we've kind of, used our entire lives. And I think it's not just giving money and donating. It's also being hands-on and working. And when you see something that's wrong, you work to fix it. And it's obviously draining, but it's kind of propelled me into a world where I don't feel like I can choose any career other than one that helps people. Oh, wow. Which is kind of debilitating, but it's also amazing that I get to do that and that I feel strong enough that I have to do that.
Are you religious?
No, not really. I would say that I am more culturally Jewish than anything else. I'm pretty agnostic, but I think that Judaism has been such a huge part of the communities that we've been involved in. So most of my parents' friends were people that they met at the synagogue, and it's very liberal and progressive synagogues, but the ideas and the culture and values are there. And that's, I think, what bleeds into my everyday life.
You grew up in New Jersey and now you're living there in DC. Do you know if you've ever been the first Jewish person anybody's ever met?
Yes, definitely, actually.
College or probably?
College and before. We had an exchange student from Italy and she had never met a Jewish person.
Oh, look at the Jews. Hey, oh.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, she lived with us for almost a year. So
Did she ever say that? Did she ever come in and go, oh, look at the Jews. Oh, I bet she didn't.
Those exact words did come out of her mouth every once in a while.
That's how she walked into the room in the morning. Right. Oh, wow. Okay, that's pretty cool. For how long did this young Italian person stay? Did you like this person?
I love her. I keep in touch with her.
Oh, wow.
Today. Yeah, she's a couple years older and she stayed with us for most of a school year. So I think it was around 8 months and was a part of our family, went on a couple trips with us. And it was really interesting to get to know her and her experiences. And she had definitely never met a Jewish person before. And being at college I have a lot of friends who are international students, and most of them have met Jewish people at some point, but a lot of my friends are really not well versed with Jewish culture, traditions at all. And it's been interesting to get to talk to them and teach them a little bit.
Well, the reason I ask is because I'm guessing that you understood hatred, discrimination, anti-Semitism, certainly history growing up. I'm sure you did. But like, have you, with the spike in anti-Semitism, with actual attacks on synagogues and stuff, have you ever had to, explain any of that? That's what I was thinking when I asked you the question. Like, have you ever had to talk about, teach that history or talk with people about what is happening right now in the world?
I would say yes. I mean, I think that we live, I mean, in college and before college, I and my community, we've lived in a very isolated, privileged bubble. And as a result, I think we take for granted the fact that there are Jews all around us. And I say that as a Jewish person, but also non-Jewish people are more accustomed to being around Jewish people. And so we don't consider it, like, we don't think about the fact that Jews are 0.02% of the world population.
Right.
And so I think that since there has been a rise in anti-Semitism, it's come up a bunch with friends. And I think that it has been something that we've had to talk about. And also, there have been a lot of times where I've had to explain to someone why what they said might have been anti-Semitic, or, I mean, sometimes it has to do with Israel stuff, and explain what Zionism is and why it's not so black and white, and why saying that, I mean, and I'm someone who's very much pro-Israel and pro-Palestine, and that's obviously a whole rabbit hole that we don't have to go down, but explaining that it's not just free Palestine, it's also what Zionism is believing that Jews have a right to have a state of their own. And I think people are very, very unintentionally and often anti-Semitic, and I see it more and more. I think I've started to notice it in my everyday life, and it's so not intentional, but I'm like, oh, wait, no, don't say that. And it's happened in places I've worked. It's happened with friends. And I usually try and educate them. Or, you know, if they didn't know I was Jewish, I might put them on the spot and be like, oh, but I'm Jewish.
Right. That's fun.
Yeah, it's kind of fun. It feels a little bad for them, but I mean, I do try and not just take it from me against them. And I try and educate people, especially if it's someone I care about who just doesn't know. And it has been fun over the years to educate my non-Jewish friends about Jewish traditions, because I think they're really cool, and a lot of people can benefit from them.
I love that you get that opportunity. I'm sad that you have to, I mean, we always have to educate about each other, especially when you're a young person. That's part of being young, I guess. But have you felt any anti-Semitism from young people? Have you felt any at all in your life? Have you ever been targeted or?
No, I think I'm pretty lucky in the sense that there's no instance that stands out as like a instance where I was targeted specifically for being Jewish. But of course, there have been a lot of things said in passing that are anti-Semitic, and like those quote Jew jokes that people think they're being edgy by saying about the Holocaust and things like that. And there have been, the main thing that stood out is there have been many instances of, at my various schools, swastikas being drawn on the school property. And once it was on, my friend was sitting next to me in our chemistry classroom in high school, and I remember she's also Jewish, and she looked down on her desk and there was a swastika on her desk, and she went pretty ballistic, understandably. And it was, I mean, it's hard. That's been hard, and it's happened at college a bunch. And the main thing is that the administration barely talks about it. They announce that it happens, but you know that nothing's going to change. And I don't know, I don't really talk to my friends that much about it either. It doesn't apply to most people. And so they kind of just brush it off, but it definitely still affects me, even if it's not directly me being targeted. It feels like, because the community is so small, that it's an attack on one of us specifically,
right?
Like Jews like me who are much more culturally Jewish and very politically progressive. I just think in general, when there's an attack on a Jew, or a Jewish person, it really does affect the rest of us, because we're already such a population.
Yeah. Okay, well, you're now working to help another group of people. This is people, human beings who have been basically displaced as a result of climate change. This is an issue that you've gotten interested in, and you're working to raise money for the International Refugee Assistance Program through this organization that you're working with. And I'll have all the information for that. If anybody is in Tennessee, specifically Nashville, Tennessee, at the end of January. That is when this event is going to be held, and you're helping organize and produce it, even though you don't live in Tennessee, but that's where it's based out of. It's a casino night. And again, all the links are going to be there for people if they want to donate or learn more. But I'm interested in how you found out about this issue. First of all, I mean, you just grew up, I guess, like my girls, learning about climate change to a certain extent. I don't know how much. I don't know how much you've thought about it growing up, but certainly, obviously, you're thinking a lot about it now. What was the introduction to this issue, specifically how climate somehow displaces people?
So it's a great question, and I wish I had a more interesting answer. I don't feel like there was one specific instance where I realized that I really cared about climate displacement and it was something that I wanted to focus on. I will say that climate change in general has been something that I think has affected a lot of people my age in terms of emotionally. I mean, of course, there's the physical element of, a climate related event can really affect people and, their homes and all of that. But I think that we've grown up, especially with social media, in this world where there are climate change deniers, and there are people who have created this problem but are unwilling to solve it. And my generation has just had to confront and deal with the repercussions of that. And I think that it's been really hard. And I remember, I think I was probably around 15 when I had a conversation with my friends. It was about how I wasn't sure that I wanted to have biological children because I didn't want to bring them into a world.
I was going to ask you that. I was going to ask if you've ever had, and do you have those conversations? And definitely. I suppose every generation says, well, do I want to bring kids into this world or something for whatever, if you're living during any number of different periods or persecutions, I suppose. But I mean, I just feel like, so you guys really talk about that. You really have had, I interrupted you. You're saying that you actually had that conversation. I don't know if I want to have kids because of the climate crisis.
Yeah. And I think, there's always a conversation of bringing them in during this, this time. But I don't think it's ever been a conversation of the world might not be able to survive until the end of their lives.
Right.
And I think it's really sad. I mean, yes, of course, adopting kids is great for a number of reasons because there's so many children who don't have homes and families. And I think that in itself is super important. But I kind of started thinking about that because I wasn't sure that I wanted to bring kids into the world where they wouldn't get to be safe and live in a world that was, going to be around after they were gone.
Live in a world that would be comfortable to live in and not be constantly affected by horrific storms and droughts. And, it's getting harder to live. And obviously it's already happening. Hence climate displacement and this organization that the UN is working with, International Refugee Assistance Program. And you're working on this nonprofit, which is really cool. And is that something that you want to do for the rest of your life? Because I know that your parents, again, going back to them, I have known your mom for a long time. Well, I've known both your parents for a long time, but it just so happens that I reconnected with them at a benefit that they were in attendance at. And that's not the only benefit they go to. Like, they're involved in philanthropical efforts and, doing whatever they can to help. I mean, I know that's part of, like you said, how you grew up. So is that something that you want to continue to do, to work for, fundraising and help different organizations raise money for different causes?
I would say I don't see myself doing anything that's not related to human rights for the rest of my life. Whether it's climate change and climate displacement, I'm not sure, but 100%, I don't see my career going anywhere except working on helping people, specifically internationally, but in general. And I think that definitely has to do with my parents. I mean, my mom's a social worker and my dad has founded multiple nonprofit organizations that do a multitude of different things that are benefiting people and helping people, whether it be Musicians on Call, which is, spreading joy and safety through music at the bedsides of patients in hospitals, or the Christiane Carr Fund, which raises money for a very rare form of cancer called sarcoma. they've definitely set a really positive example, as I think we've established. And I do see myself continuing this kind of work. I don't know that I'm going to want to do fundraisers for the rest of my life, just because I realize that I'm only 19, but I have done a lot of them so far. And I think I might want to kind of veer more to the policy side and advocacy, sure. But we'll see. But this event, so I started working with this family foundation in Nashville called the Joseph Family Foundation about, I want to say 6 months ago. And I work with this woman, Sophie, who is actually 20 years old, and she's the director of the foundation. It's her family's foundation. So it's just her sister, and her parents. And she runs the foundation. She makes the decisions about where the money is going to be directed. And obviously they just approve it, but she works really hard and is definitely really impressive. And getting to sit down and work with her, the first thing she kind of said to me, she asked if I wanted to just come on and see what we can do together. And she asked if I wanted to choose the next organization that the foundation gives money to. And this was right when Roe v. Wade was overturned. And I remember having a conversation with her saying, do we want to raise or do we want to direct money to this really important cause with reproductive rights? Or do we want to do something that people aren't talking about that's just as pressing? And I grappled with it a little bit. And the thing that I decided that not only would we give money, but I suggested that we do a bigger fundraiser and see how far we can push this. And the cause I came up with was climate displacement. And it's something that my parents, I think, have talked with me about in the past couple of years, and something that has just sort of been in the back of my mind. And for those of you who don't know what it is, you're not alone. Most people don't. We care a lot about climate change, and we care a lot about refugee crises and displaced people. But there's been very little attention given to the fact that 1.2 billion people are estimated to be displaced due to climate-related events by 2050, which is a really, really intense statistic. That is basically about 1 in 8 people who are going to be losing their homes and their communities in the next 28 years. So that's not something that's just happening around, like, outside of the US. It's happening here, when there's these huge hurricanes that displace thousands of people. That's climate related events. Of course, that happened before climate change. But if we look at the statistics, it's increased so much. So many people are losing their homes and potentially their livelihoods or their lives or their families' lives. And the geographical space that we have is shrinking with rising sea levels and desertification. It's just getting harder and harder, and the conditions are going to get more extreme and more extreme. And obviously this sounds terrifying, and I'm sorry for that. But, while there's so much work to be done with climate change, we also have to address this issue that people are going to need to find refuge. And
And it's only going to become a more severe and serious issue, and you're kind of getting to understand it and create awareness around it right now, which I think is really important. International Refugee Assistance Project is where the money that your Joseph Family Foundation is hosting this fundraiser in Nashville, Tennessee. So people, if they want to go, if they're in that area, you definitely should.
Yes, this event, it's going to be in Nashville, and if you're there, great. And if not, the link to donate is embedded in the podcast notes. But the reason I mention that is because you can donate to IRAP, which is the International Refugee Assistance Project, and that's great. But our event is specifically going towards their climate displacement program, which is working to create a legal framework internationally and domestically around this issue. Because right now, you can't come to the US-Mexico border, like the southern border of the US, and say you were displaced due to climate-related events and get in and gain asylum. Like, that's not an option in terms of why you were displaced. And the goal is to create a legal framework and policy around this so it's easier for people who have been displaced by climate to gain asylum. And I just wanted to mention that because I think it's a really huge part of the work that's going on. It's not just finding people homes, it's also creating the policies that we need to make this work and kind of anticipate that.
Let me move on to a couple of other things, Lucy, to talk with you about, because there's two, this whole idea for me is to try to be able to connect people generationally, people older than me, people a little younger than me, with people around your age. And of course, I'll hopefully be talking to a really diverse group of young people, both men and women, those who don't identify. We can talk about pronouns and all of that in a minute. But first of all, let's just talk about like socializing for people your age. You know, there's this idea that I always keep coming back to that I think a college professor said, that when students come into a lecture hall now or to a classroom, it's very quiet, as opposed to it used to be when students would walk in, everybody would be buzzing and talking and chattering and saying hi and whatever. But it just, everybody's looking at their phones now. And I'm not, without casting a judgment of if that's good or bad or what's changed, do you agree that that's kind of how things work? How is life as you're 19?
Yes. But most of my friends are 20. I'm a younger.
Right. So no, but all right. So everybody I want to talk to is going to be like probably 19 to 25 or so. And, you know, like, again, we're generalizing here, but it just seems that socializing is so much different in kind of every way, whether you're with roommates, whether you're in a class, whether you're out, I guess, socializing. I mean, what is socializing today? What's it like? Are you mostly on the phone? Sometimes on the phone? Are there rules? If you go out, you have to put down your phone, because it's really hard to kind of understand if it's good, bad, or what, the way that people your age are socializing today.
It's a great question. I do think it depends on the person, but in general, I would say that a huge part of our lives are on our phones. We look at social media obsessively, whether it's TikTok or Instagram or Snapchat. We communicate largely via text. I really like calling and FaceTiming more than text, and I try to utilize that more. But the majority of the way we communicate is via text. And I think one of the major differences is, you know, when you had to quit a job, like a babysitting job, or when you had to break up with someone, in the past, you would do that in person, or if you had to ask for a raise or have an uncomfortable conversation, whatever it is, you would go in person and you would have a face-to-face conversation. And now it's much more easier and it's more socially acceptable to craft a really well-written text and send that instead. I would say the breakup one is less common. That really is still done in person, but I have quit babysitting jobs that way because I feel like it's less uncomfortable and I can say everything I need to. And I'm not proud of it, but it's less taboo than it used to be. I think it's the way that our generation is most comfortable communicating. And, you know, when I have arguments with my friends, I try to do that in person or at least on the phone, but it often will happen over text and it's not good and it's not super healthy. And I think that we are, as a generation, more socially unequipped to deal with.
You think that? You think your generation is somehow socially unequipped as a result of all of the technology that we use to communicate?
I do. I think that we're really smart as a generation and really capable and really powerful. But I also think we have a really hard time communicating face to face. And also, I think just putting down our phones and our technology for long enough to have a real engaged conversation. I find with a lot of my friends that they can't help but pick up their phone every couple seconds.
Sure,
they can't even go without also playing a game on their phone or scrolling social media. And I am someone who tries really hard to kind of only do one screen at a time. And if we're at a restaurant, I yell at my friends if they have their phones out. I think and even with my parents, if they take out their phone to do something semi-urgent, I just say, can it wait? And they say the same thing to us. And I think it's not just afflicting our generation, it's afflicting the majority of the current generations. And I think technology in so many ways is such a positive thing, but I think it does enable us to kind of shut down socially. And I think the point you made about the walking into a lecture hall and how it's silent, I would say that's accurate. I think there's exceptions and people warm up and then, you know, you do chat and say, how are you? How's your day? But a lot of my classes, you'll walk in and it'll be dead silent until the professor starts talking and we will all just be doing whatever we're doing on our phones or our computers. And I think it's really sad. And I really like human face-to-face communication and connection. I think it's also crucial for mental health and the physical connection that we have is, you know, that's why mental health issues spiked during the pandemic is we didn't have that physical connection. And I think it is really important, but I don't know. I think that it's definitely lacking, and it's kind of just how we've been socialized, and we do need to unlearn some of it. And I think some of it we also just need to adjust to.
Well, well said. Great answer. It feels like you have a good grasp and understanding of it, whether or not people, adhere to it, much less yourself. Those rules is hard. It's hard to dictate those social, I guess, norms. And speaking of which, we also wanted to talk about dating for people your age, much less any age, but with all of this same technology, because it sounds like I don't want to use one word to describe what it's like, but it's fraught. There's a lot going on, and it makes it hard to kind of, at least in some of our talks, to have like a relationship, because it's just so easy to meet the next person and date because of these apps and so on. So my question is generally around dating. Again, it's your experience. You're there. You're a college student in DC and whatever other categories and however else you identify. It's your journey and it's your point of view. And I think that's a given here. But but with that said, what's dating like for 19-year-olds in college?
Well, it's a loaded question, Pete.
Yeah.
I personally have had a very hard time with love and dating in my life. I haven't found the connections that I've wanted romantically. I've kind of wanted to fall in love since I was, probably 10 years old. And I haven't found that. And I think a lot of it has to do with, the beauty standard and what people expect / what they want. And specifically, a lot of that has to do with the standards that men have for women. But obviously, it does go both ways. And I think that in college, I have found that while a lot of my friends are in happy relationships and I've met them organically, a lot of people really only find that they can do any kind of dating through dating apps. And while there's so much positive stuff with dating apps and you can meet people you would never have ordinarily met, it also means that there's such a hookup culture that's created. And I have found that it's really hard to meet someone on a dating app and for them to not expect that the first thing you're going to do is have sex. And maybe that's just my experience or something that I'm putting out into the world, but I have found that so much of it revolves around hooking up. And it doesn't mean that you can't establish a genuine connection or that you can't actually start dating, because you can and it happens. But I often find, and I think many of my friends would agree, and probably hopefully other people in our generation would agree, that a lot of times you hook up with someone before you start dating them, which is really interesting and definitely new. And there's nothing wrong with just, if you want to hook up, just hooking up and then leaving it alone, or just having an ongoing hookup of some kind. There's nothing wrong with that. I am fully supportive. But if you want more, I think it's a little bit harder to come by. And it's also really hard to figure out what other people want because everyone has their cards really close to their chest.
Do you think, what percentage of your friends or people your age use apps versus other more, I guess, traditional ways of meeting and dating?
It's a good question. I think probably 80% of my friends have dating apps or have had dating apps. And a lot of my friends have met their significant others, in classes or through friends of friends. But a lot of people I've also met through dating apps that I know. So it's kind of a combination. But most people I know, it's not really taboo at this point to use dating apps. I think there was a time when it was, but now basically everyone does. And it's awkward when you see someone on there, but also it's just kind of part of the process.
You wanted to talk about the issues around sexual assault, rape, the Me Too movement, equality, things that people your age are dealing with. You brought that up, and you specifically said, and we talked about what had happened to you in college, and that you wanted to share that. And I think, first of all, I'm really grateful that you want to. And second of all, I think it's super important. I came home and talked with my whole family about your situation that you're about to share with everybody, to kind of help them understand, what goes on in the world and what to be ready for. Not that anybody ever can. Ben, you wanted to talk about that. Why do you want to talk about that publicly what happened with you?
Well, I think that people don't necessarily realize that sexual assault and rape is as pervasive as it is in college and beyond. But I know my experience in high school and before college was that sexual assault was something that was very far away from me. It wasn't something that happened to people I knew for the most part. And it was usually not by people that you know. It was kind of just this scary thing that could happen. Like if you were kidnapped, you might get raped or something like that. And obviously that's not true. And I think I knew that. But when I got to college, it was a rude awakening for me. And I think that older generations who aren't, in this world right now in terms of dating apps and college and hookup culture wouldn't necessarily expect to hear about the things that I experienced and the things that my friends have experienced. And just the fact that the majority of the women specifically that I know have been sexually assaulted, and the ones who haven't have every single woman I know has been sexually harassed, whether it be, I know being groped is really kind of assault, but whether it's, getting your ass grabbed in public or whether it's being leered at or like whatever it is, every single woman I know has experienced that. And of course, there are non-binary trans folks and men who have experienced that as well. But most of the people who I know have been women, and it's kind of this shared experience that we have. And it is something sort of in a messed up way that we can bond over. But the main reason I want to share it is because I don't think people realize how much of a problem it is when you're not on a college campus. Because if you are,
Well, I also think that there's something else that's really important that I learned from you and a couple of other people who were victims or survivors of. I don't know if there's a terminology that you necessarily feel most comfortable using, victim or survivor. I know people have different words, but which is sometimes people are assaulted and they don't realize it's an assault because situations can be confusing. And you were specifically when you are on a date, when you've gone out with someone, when you've been going out with someone. And I think that is something that's really new. Maybe my generation, my parents' generation, those kinds of things happen. And maybe a woman would come home like, this guy was a dick. He was really this or that. He was really rough, or he was. But now there's a pretty clear definition, legal definition, and there of course are standards and so on. But sometimes you're assaulted and you don't realize that's what happened, and a lot of times you end up blaming yourself for being in that situation. So how do you want to get into this, Lucy?
Okay, so the first thing I want to say, I think that pertains directly to my experience, and I can share that in a minute. But the first thing I want to say is part of the reason that this culture around sexual assault has been so convoluted is that people have told us that it is because of the situations we put ourselves in, and it is because of what we're wearing. And I wrote a paper last year about, because it's a argument that my parents and I have a lot about how what I'm wearing might affect people's perception of me. And I am someone who believes that you should wear whatever you want, and that is not an invitation to be assaulted, and that's not a reason why you were assaulted. And I last year wrote a paper on this concept, and I found a lot of academic studies that all show that what you're wearing does not affect the fact that you're assaulted. And it doesn't actually have a correlation, which a lot of people would be surprised about. And I mean, do your own research if you don't believe me. Not you, Pete, just in general.
I'll trust your research.
You do, of course.
But I do want to. I want to give you my layman's take on that, my old man take on that, because we talked about this. But go ahead and finish kind of the point about that part of it, the invitation based on who you are, or what you're wearing, or how you carry yourself. Yeah,
I think it's often really difficult to grapple with that after. And I think that after we finish this, clothing side of the conversation, I'll share my experience and how there were a lot of things that were confusing for me.
Okay, so here's my thing, and then you'll
Yes.
When
Go for it.
my daughters are both young, attractive women, I guess. I mean, I think they're beautiful young women, and by the classic sense, I suppose, they're in great shape and blah, blah, blah. So they like to wear very little, often at times, even to school. Not every day. You know, sometimes they just wear sweats and a hoodie, whatever. But other days, especially my older daughter, my 17-year-old, she really puts it together. Like, she's actually got most stylish or something like that this year, her superlative. But like, she'll wear like a half shirt. Just like her belly's out. She's got a navel piercing, which I don't love, because a lot of that kind of says to me, look at me and this and then, which is okay, because a lot of your positive attributes are look over at me. I'm a good thing. I mean, that's true if you're a great quarterback. Look at me. I'm a great quarterback. I'm not saying that is inherently bad. What I have always worried about is that they're going to be drawing their self-esteem too much of their self-esteem or confidence or even identity and validation is going to come from the way that they look and the way that they are perceived. And I feel like that's disconcerting, because I don't want them. I've always said when they were little, you know, when people say, "Oh, your daughter's so beautiful," I say, "Yeah, that's her ninth best quality." And I tried not to focus on that as a compliment that I would be giving, because I knew strangers would be giving them that validation. So that's my concern. Do I have any leg to stand on with that?
Yes, definitely. I think the answer is yes. I think that is the one thing that I would say is it should be a factor, but it's very, very close to, I don't want you to wear something because I don't want someone to have the wrong idea. And I think that it should, you know, you shouldn't draw your self-esteem based on what people think of how you look. And I think it's very hard for us to do that, especially with the pervasiveness of social media. But I do think regardless of that, it is our own, you know, decision, or in some people's opinions, mistake to make. If we want to wear something super revealing and then it doesn't go well and we aren't flattered by what people say about us, that's still our decision. And I think the most important thing is what you wear should be what you're comfortable in. And whether it's sweats and a hoodie, great. Or whether it's a bikini top and jean shorts, that's also fine. And obviously, I think you asked me this in like a previous call. There is a time and a place. And I think there's some element of, you do have to know your audience, or at least know where
you're not wearing
going.
that to a funeral. You're not wearing a bikini top or a tank top or I don't know clothes names. I'm so old. A tube top, a tee, some top. You're not wearing that to a funeral or a wedding or,
Exactly.
I mean.
But I do think the biggest thing that comes up is school, and specifically high school dress codes. And the problem with it is, you know, of course there's a line, you shouldn't be naked. But if you wear a super crop top and you show a lot of cleavage, it's no one else's problem except yours. There should never be the excuse of it distracts someone else. It distracts your teachers. That should never be what is brought up there. It's if you are comfortable in it, and if you're not literally showing your nipples or your, like, I'm not going to go into that, but if you're not showing like your private parts,
your bathing suit areas.
Right, exactly. It really should not be anyone else's problem. And I think a big part, it would be one thing if the dress code was uniform for everyone, but my experience has been, there has been so much that's body discrimination. And if you're a bigger girl wearing the same thing that a skinny girl is wearing, you're going to be the one who's dress coded. I've experienced it. I have friends who have experienced it. And even, I mean, sorry to call out my parents, but my parents have said to me, you shouldn't wear that top. If Jaden was wearing that top, who's my best friend, I have very large boobs and she has smaller boobs. If she was wearing that top, it would be fine. But you can't wear it.
They actually say that there's a difference.
Yes.
Based on your breast size, that if this person wears it, it's okay because they're not as distracting than as.
Right. Exactly. And I don't think that should be a factor. I think you should wear what you're comfortable in. And that's really the only thing that matters.
It's a pretty ballsy argument.
It is. I mean, I feel like it's one of the most controversial little conversations you can have. But I believe for the most part, as long as you're, somewhat respectful, it should be about what you're comfortable in. And the most important thing is that it's just never an invitation for anyone to touch you or treat you any differently.
But it is an invitation, or at least it's an opening. It's on the table if you met someone on a dating app. It's on the table if you invite someone over or if you go out with them. It's on the table. That's always kind of been the case. It's not on the table if you're my boss. It's not on the table in many, many places, but it is in others, which gets us, into this situation which you found yourself in. Do you want to describe it? Do you want me to set it up a little bit?
No, I can. Okay,
because we talked about this, and it's really, it's hard, obviously, for people to hear. It's obviously tough to go through, but it's also tough to talk about. So I wasn't sure how you wanted to. But go ahead. Yeah. You knew this guy. You talked to him a few times. You'd met him before?
No. So this was in January of this year, and I want to just preface by saying that this is going to be, I'm not going to be going into crazy detail, but this is, a topic that is very difficult for some people to listen to. So this is just an effectual trigger warning. So this was a guy that I met on Bumble.
Which is a dating app for you people.
Which is a dating app, yep. Yes. And I was in a little hookup phase because I was a freshman in college, and it's just kind of what we did. And I thought I was having a really good time and just, trying to live my best life, etc. But I met this guy. He seemed really sweet over text, Snapchat, whatever, however we were communicating. We'd never called or anything, but it was just a couple of days of talking, just, nothing serious. It was very obvious that this was going to be a hookup and probably nothing more. And I was very comfortable with that. I'm someone who is pretty comfortable hooking up with a virtual stranger. That just hasn't been something that's really been a problem for me, which I know some people definitely have different opinions on. But he seemed really sweet and kind of talked about how we were going to cuddle, and he would sleep over in my dorm room because I didn't have a roommate at the time. And So I invited him over, and obviously, the plan was to have sex. That's kind of very clear, and this is not something that needs to be disputed at all. But that's also why this is a specifically difficult case, because when someone's assaulted or raped when the plan was already to have sex, it makes it really hard to say, but this is not what I wanted. And I think my specific situation once, and I told Pete, I told you this earlier, I knew afterwards that I didn't like it, and I was in a lot of pain, and I probably should have, gotten a rape kit or something like that. But I didn't think of any of that because I thought it was, I didn't like it. I didn't enjoy hooking up with him. This wasn't great for me. And it took me explaining in detail what happened to my therapist a couple days later, and her telling me in very plain words, you were sexually assaulted, and I have to decide as a mandated reporter whether or not to report him and report the situation.
The therapist put you in a situation where
she was very clear, and she didn't report it because that's not what I wanted. He also didn't go to my college. If he had, I think it would have been a very different situation in terms of what I would have done. But he's also a college student, and I just don't know that much about him. And I think the saddest part of this whole thing is I don't think that he knows that he raped me, which is really hard to grapple with.
How do you define, how much do you, I don't know how much detail you want to go in, but how did you define it as an assault, much less a rape, based on, because people listening to it might be confused, well, what happened?
No, that's totally valid. And I think usually I use the word assaulted, but I think more recently I've kind of come to terms with the fact that this was penetrative sex that I did not want. This was ultimately rape. So what happened was he came over to my dorm room, and it was fine. I didn't there wasn't much talking, whatever. We start hooking up, and it turns very quickly into extremely rough stuff. So I think the culture in my generation, I think this is a newer thing, is that things like light choking and, hair pulling and all that stuff, that's kind of that's not even considered kinky anymore. That's kind of the standard. And there's nothing wrong with that. I am totally fine with all of that. But he basically,
Well, hold on. What you mean by there's nothing wrong with it, I'm okay with it. What you're saying is if you're into that, if people like that, I'm saying there's nothing wrong with it and I'm okay with it.
yeah,
But
yeah,
you're
it
not
should always be consensual.
you're not necessarily saying that you were into it with this person.
Well, the thing is, I think I've had experiences with those kinds of things and really enjoyed it. And I don't think that was the problem. I think that this went way too far. And I think there are people who enjoy this kind of sex. But what happened to me was I was pretty much forced. So it wasn't light choking. He like fully choked me where I was like on the verge of passing out and I couldn't breathe. And my like upper chest the next day was really sore from him like pushing down on me. And he smacked me in the face really hard a bunch of times. He never asked to do any of those things. And I think it is one thing if you ask in advance, not that I think that that's something that I would ever enjoy, but I know there are people who do like that kind of pain in sex and that's a personal preference, but there does need to be consent and there was no consent. He also there was not that, I mean, this happens a lot, but there was no foreplay. He forced himself into me. I was in immense amounts of pain, like crying out, and he clamped his hand over my mouth. And so I couldn't breathe for a multitude of reasons. And part of it, and part of what has come up afterwards is people asking me, specifically my parents and friends asking, why didn't you say stop? And I thought about this a lot. And obviously my mouth was covered, but if I had, so it's very possible that I did try and say stop. I honestly can't remember, but I go with the idea that I hadn't. And if I hadn't, it was because I thought at least this way it'll be over and there won't be as much resistance. And if I say stop and he doesn't stop, then I have to go the rest of the time, like knowing that this is completely against my will. And I feel like it would be more traumatizing, even though there was nothing that I consented to, like other than we planned to have sex and that was it. There was no consent in the moment. He was physically abusing me and there was nothing that I could really do about it, but I didn't explicitly say stop or scream or anything like that. And I didn't feel like I could. And I think this is another reason why I wouldn't really ever do anything legally. Plus, there's no physical evidence because I didn't get a rape kit afterwards. But I was, he smacked me a bunch of times in the face and pushed me down. And then also the condom broke and he just continued having sex with me without asking after that. And also recorded a video afterwards not of my face, but like of him basically having sex with me.
No.
Yeah. And without asking me again. And I just kind of pretended like I never feigned pleasure, but I just never said anything about anything because I just wanted it to be over. And I was really obviously terrified. And I was bloody afterwards and bruised. And like I had bruises on my, like, I think maybe my ear, I don't know, like on my body, and was like bleeding afterwards and in a lot of pain. And I just kind of concluded afterwards that I didn't like it and it didn't feel good. And I didn't think of it as, oh, he just fully assaulted me. And it wasn't until, first, obviously my therapist telling me, but also till the kind of PTSD symptoms started where I could really come to terms with it. I didn't realize how much it affected me until I was having panic attacks and couldn't sleep. And I've never had a problem sleeping, and I just could not sleep. And I just would replay it in my head and freak out and shut down. And it was really, really horrible and traumatizing. And it took me, it's December now, so it's been almost a year. And I still think about it. And the last time I had a panic attack was probably in September. And I think it's, my situation wasn't even as bad as others. And there was really, to me, there's nothing that I can do about it now that I want to do about it now. But it was an instance where I didn't completely know I was assaulted. And so that's my story. But I just want to say that, there's other instances that people don't we don't really realize what is considered assault. And I'm not saying that we're being too delicate in, today's day and age. Like, I know before you would be assaulted and you wouldn't really consider it that, but I don't think it's being too delicate. I think it's acknowledging this isn't okay. And like, we've been kind of in this patriarchal cycle of pain for women, and that just being fine and accepted.
It's okay if the man says it's okay. It's okay if the man wants to do it. Yeah.
And so my good friend, she was hooking up with the guy consistently. So this was not dating, but they were seeing each other regularly, just kind of for hanging out, whatever that means. And they had sex and all of that. And there was a day, ironically, it was the same day that I was assaulted. We realized that this year,
Jesus.
which was kind of funny, not really funny, but we make a lot of jokes about it, which other people really don't like. So anyway, those
are your jokes to make, and they're not necessarily jokes that other people hear and want to laugh, but you're trying to own the situation and find the humor. I applaud you for that, but I don't want to be around for them. But I do applaud. Right. It's an uncomfortable situation. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
So basically, she hadn't eaten much that day by accident, and she was hooking up with this guy, and they were standing up, and they were, I think, having sex while she was standing, and she was like about to pass out. And so obviously he like stopped having sex with her, and then she fainted and like fell on the floor. And obviously that's horrible, but that's no one's fault. Like, she was whatever. And then she was
low blood. She hadn't eaten is the point. And
right.
Yep.
And then she wakes up on the bed with him inside of her. And obviously there was movement, and he was not inside of her, and then he was while she was unconscious. And she had asked some of her friends who are no longer her friends, she had described this situation, and they'd said, there's nothing wrong. Basically, you're overreacting, and kind of just kind of gaslit her. And it took her pretty much until September from January to come to terms with what happened to her as being assault. And she, after that instance, continued to hook up with him on multiple occasions and continued to talk to him. And she didn't realize that this had been, she knew, but she didn't really come to terms with it for a long time. And I think I have a lot of friends who have had that kind of experience where it's a trauma response to just shut down and to not remember it that way. It's way easier, as someone who experienced it, I say it's way, way easier to pretend like it didn't happen. But once it hits you, it's really, you can't really go back. And it's very scary. And I think that there's so many instances of this, and
you told me also, I wanted you to tell people about how you went out to a club and someone groped you, and as a result, you had this kind of panic attack. And it's just, this is what the damage that an assault like the one that you had to go through doesn't go away, because it gets re-triggered. I think most people, unfortunately, probably can understand and relate to that, but right? Like, what happened?
Yeah, no, I think most people can. It was my roommate's birthday, and we went to a club. This was in September, and I'm not the biggest fan of clubs anymore, just not since this, just I burnt myself out of that freshman year, and we went because it was her birthday, and we were walking through, it was extremely crowded. You could barely move, and we were walking through the crowd, and I was in the back with the back of the line going through the club with my friends. So no one was there to see it happen because I was behind them. And I felt like a hand reach under my skirt and grab my ass. And I turned around, and I didn't see anyone who was like looking at me or couldn't figure out who did it. And I was obviously freaked out, and I started to keep walking. And then I feel a hand reach under my skirt again. And I reach down, I grab his arm, I turn around, and I like smack him on the arm. I should have done worse than I did, and then I cursed him out and cursed out his friends. But it was in a club. It's like and I was also effectually alone. Like, my friends they were ahead of me. So I was obviously terrified also of just, being grabbed or something, or smacked or punched, whatever. So then I walked away. And right after that, I felt like, the club I was already not having a good time, and the club was so crowded, but I just felt like so terrified, and like I couldn't move, and I had like a full breakdown. I like ran to the bathroom. I was like, I have to leave. And I ran to the bathroom, and because I wanted to just go get in an Uber, but I was wearing not enough clothes where felt safe going outside by myself. So I went to the bathroom first and I just like broke down crying, and my friends came and found me. And that night I just, that week was really hard because that week, this was, many months after I thought I was maybe moving past it, and it just brought everything rushing back. And I had like a full on panic attack that week where I couldn't fall asleep, and it was like 2 a.m. and I realized that the blanket on my bed was the blanket that had been on my bed in January, and I like ripped it off my bed and was just hysterical, and it has, and I mean that's probably the last time that I've like had a really bad reaction, but it just happens kind of whenever, all the time. And I think people think it's people don't realize how not linear the healing experience is and how long it takes.
Well, it's easier to understand when you explain it the way that you just did, how nonlinear it is and how things can trigger and remind you. I'm sure people listening to this conversation are going through that experience right now, and I'm so grateful that you felt safe enough to share it with me and allow people to hear it. I guess, what do you want to say to like people listening about this culture and how things have changed, and how those of us who have, sons or daughters your age can understand, can do better? Like I said before, I talked about your situation with my kids. I think that really is helpful because it as you explained it can be confusing, and there needs to be a certain communication. But the way I felt also was like, listen, like I can't believe that people are behaving this way sexually without a conversation about it ahead. And, I don't know, maybe I'm old, but that sounds weird to me. And then I said, I also think that a lot of it is because like boys and men are learning kind of sex and how to from so much pornography. I've heard people say that. And if that's in that kind of behavior is in porn, but what do you want to say to kind of help people understand how we can all do better in terms of understanding, in terms of parenting, in terms of our own behavior?
I'm really glad you asked. I think it's really important, especially, if you're listening to this and you're not a member of my generation, to take a step back and know that you don't know everything about it. Sorry, but I think there's a lot to learn, and just because you wouldn't have done it the same way doesn't mean that it was wrong.
Right.
And it doesn't mean that it's anyone else's fault.
Right.
And I'm not just talking about my own experience. I think, it's really important that you pay attention. If you live in an area where there's a college campus, like pay attention to what's going on there, because at my school on Halloween, there was a break-in to an all-female floor dorm it was another student at my school, and he broke into a girl's room and assaulted her. And it prompted a walkout, and I don't have a lot of time to get into this, but Title IX, learn what Title IX is.
Well, you sent me an article at The Nation about what happened at your school. So it's,
yes.
After an intruder sexually assaulted a dorm resident, students at American University walked out en masse to expose their school's inaction. And so there's a whole report, and that's just one report on that. Go ahead. Sorry.
It is no. Thank you for saying that. It's pretty ridiculous how many schools. So Title IX is at like all colleges across the country, and the point of it is that you can report a sexual assault or misconduct allegation against someone, and you have options. It can be anonymous. Nothing can happen out of it. It's just there, or you can hope to carry out an investigation, like have them carry out an investigation. And there are so many cases of Title IX that you can't, like, there's so little movement when you submit one. And the majority of them, unless there's concrete evidence, they won't carry out an investigation and they won't do anything. And when something like this happens, and I will say this because this is not a exactly verified source, but I do believe that this is likely true. After this happened, the school sent out an email about it happening and said that there was an investigation. They were working with the local police in addition to AUPD, and all this stuff. And they had a description of the person who did it, and they sent updates that weren't really updates. There was never anything being updated. But I found out from someone who lives in that building that they know who did it. It was a student, and it was just someone whose parents were paying the school a lot of money, and so they didn't ever release
The
his
schools
name.
have a public image. They're for-profit companies. They're getting a lot of money from some family. I mean, again, not verified, but that's the kind of thing that obviously can and does happen, unfortunately, in college campuses across the country for obvious yet immoral and should be illegal reasons. But
it's super common, not just at my school, but all over. And there are a lot of protests all over the country.
Yeah, if you're a star athlete or, you're bringing the school mostly a lot of good notoriety, obviously everybody knows. Yeah, it's terrible, just terrible.
And I would highly recommend, if you have time, to read Know My Name, or I think it's Know My Name by Chanel Miller, and it's about the Stanford sexual assault case that happened a bunch of years ago.
I was thinking about that case just now. Yeah, I mean, it was such a high profile. Yeah, go ahead.
She is the woman who was assaulted, and she has this memoir experience, like explaining her experience, and it's just unbelievable. And I read it actually right after I was assaulted, and it really messed me up in a lot of ways, but it also really helped me heal. And I would highly recommend it. And I just would say that
Know My Name by Chanel Miller.
Yes. I would just say that it's really important that you pay attention to what's going on with your children and make sure that you don't assume anything, because it's not what you think a lot of the time. And I think that it's really important that you don't just automatically assume what's going on.
Right.
And I know I just said that in the exact same words. But,
no, I appreciate that. I also think that people might have wanted me at some point, since you described your assault, your rape, that people would have wanted me to say, I hope you're getting help. I know that you've sought out a lot of resources and therapy and so on, right? Like, you've done what people suggested so that you're not alone and everything that comes with it.
No, and I do feel like I've had, a good community around me. Great. And I have gotten to deal with it in the time that I've needed to take for it, but it's still very hard. And it's still something that you really ultimately kind of have to face alone, because it's your memories. And if you're alone in that situation, which I was, there's not, I can still share it and talk about it. But it definitely takes a lot of time and effort to heal. And I think that, there's so many cases and so many people, and don't assume that the person you're friends with or your, friend's child hasn't experienced something like that. And I just think don't take it lightly. And also, just in any way you can, hold these institutions accountable, hold these attackers accountable, whether that be with boycotting a product or withholding donations to an institution like my college, which I'm not saying you should do because you probably don't donate to American University, but things like that, and just listening to survivors. I think it's really important, especially, if you're listening to this and you're not a member of my generation, to take a step back and know that you don't know everything about it. Sorry, but I think there's a lot to learn. And just because you wouldn't have done it the same way doesn't mean that it was wrong.
Right.
And it doesn't mean that it's anyone else's fault.
Right.
And to their stories and believing them. It's sometimes I even have a hard time, sometimes hearing a survivor's story and then saying, I want to believe you. Like, I believe you. Because, especially when it's your friend, like your friend who you hear a story about that they made someone uncomfortable, it's still someone's experience. Even though you might love that person and want to, take care of them and protect them, it's still someone's experience. And it still means that you need to educate whoever made someone uncomfortable. Or if it was something worse, you need to hold that person accountable. Right. And that is your responsibility.
What else do you want to say about this or anything else, Lucy?
I don't think I have much. I'm really grateful that I got to talk about this. And I hope that these conversations just continue to be had, whether it be, on a podcast, or if you listen to this, go home and have a conversation with whoever you love and and just try and go about it with as much openness as you can. And I'm not saying share the stories that you have of when you were assaulted. I'm just saying talk about what are these preconceived notions we have and how do we erase them and how do we protect survivors.
I think sometimes you can share a story about yourself, but tell it in the third person so that your child or somebody else doesn't know that you're talking about yourself, but they, I mean, it's like there are ways to have these conversations with people. And I don't know. I've always just thought that was so important. And for whatever reason, I've not really, and my wife's on the same page, struggled with it. So after I talked to you about this, I went right home, like I said, and talked about it. And I thought it was such a great conversation that we had as a result. And I hope also that that's what people will take from this as well. They'll have a conversation with their loved ones. I hope that this sparks that and that we don't ignore it and try to understand it. Because like you said so eloquently, we don't know everything. And this is your point of view and your experience. And I really, really appreciate you sharing it with all of us. Brave, smart, and I'm super excited to see what you do next and come back and talk to us about it.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Also, learn about Title IX.
Yeah, I think as a result of you talking about this, I will reconnect with some of the reporters that I've talked to who have covered sexual assault, specifically on campus. There was a great series in the Atlantic a few years back, a 3-part series about it that was just so enlightening, and so much has happened since. So it's a great suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you. I so appreciate all of this. It's really exciting and cool.
Yeah, exciting and cool for us too, Lucy. Thank you so much for a wonderful, hour and 20-minute conversation, a deep dive, twists and turns, tragedy and triumph. At 19, I'm very excited to see what is next for this young woman and her very bright future. Read her piece in Newsweek that she co-wrote with her friend Sophie Joseph, and support the Joseph Family Foundation and their fundraiser in Memphis on January 27th. You can learn more about all of that in today's show notes. I hope you liked this first episode of SUPD Gen Z. And if you've got a good idea for a guest, I plan to be doing this indefinitely. I don't know what level of frequency, but whenever I get good guests and am able to prep for them and do good interviews, because I want to take good care of them. So I'm certain at some point I'll lay down a conversation on the record with my intern Odessa when I get to know her even better. And I'd love to talk to some young men, from people from communities of color, anybody who has any kind of disability, whatever. Folks who are considered Gen Z, send them my way. standupwithpete@gmail.com. And that is it. That is the first edition of SUPD Gen Z. Thank you very much for supporting me. If you want to support us with a paid subscription, that would be helpful. We can continue doing this. Go to standupwithpete.com or patreon.com/Pete Dominic. John Carroll, and now Grammy Award-winning singer-songwriter, the great John Carroll, takes us out as he does every day, no matter what kind of Stand Up with Pete Dominic episode it is. A very special song he wrote just for us. Check him out at johncarroll.org.
You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up. Stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up. They had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be told message to the voice inside. And listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.